For those that don't know me, I'm Andrew Visnevski, the director of Kalamata Drama, which is an umbrella for training and cultural events based in the town of Kalamata in the Peloponnese. Kalamata Drama represents a collaboration which is ongoing between two organizations devoted to promoting initiative and innovation in theatre making, but also in performing arts generally. One is the Maria Callas Alumni Association of the Music School of Kalamata, and the other one is Theatre Alive in the UK. The core of our activity is the annual Kalamata Drama International Summer School, which is now in its third year. Now, with the generous support of the Bareva Foundation in Liechtenstein, we are also able to develop Circle of Art, which is a program of webinars, events, cultural encounters, and hopefully provocations coming from Kalamata on the subject of theatre making. These are scheduled to run until 2023. This particular encounter, our first, is made possible by the somewhat unusual link-up by members of the Maria Callas Alumni Association. Our technical controller, Sofia Dracopoulou, is in Modena, in Italy. Our incomparable executive manager, Georgi Liopoulos, is at the headquarters of the Maria Callas Association in Kalamata, and I am based in, and I'm also streaming from Kalamata. And we're going to be sitting here where we were also going to meet our guest, suitably socially distanced, but together in one place. However, Nathalie Bries has been invited to Dubai, and that's where she is now. So we'll progress. Nathalie Bries is a costume designer with a difference. She's also a researcher in history of dress and fabric with a long experience in fashion and art. Her current PhD at the Sorbonne University in Paris is Women of the Akrotiri in Terra in the late Bronze Age. It concerns the elegance and sophistication of women and clothing based on wall painting and archaeological textiles, a very rare thing to be able to deal with genuine archaeological material from that period, as far as textiles are concerned, as you can imagine. And her research combines anthropology and scientific perspectives. She runs her own fashion company as well, called Nathalie d'Anvers, which is based in Belgium. She is the co-founder of an international non-profit making organization for the research, preservation, promotion of cultural heritage relating to textiles, fashion, craftsmanship, and associated fields, which is called Euphrosyne AISBL. She has designed costumes for numerous productions and considered a specialist in the field of clothing in ancient Attica in Greece. She has presented many workshops and participated in seminars and presentations across the EU. As designer and director of Nathalie d'Anvers, her emphasis is on creating an alternative for fast fashion through sustainable creations, and her designs are made in natural, high-quality materials by haute couture, atelier, and artisans. But we shall now, this is an introduction. So Nathalie, hello in Dubai. Can you hear me?
Yes, Andrew. Hello everybody. Thank you for having me this evening.
It's a great pleasure. We shall base our conversation upon the challenges set by Greek classic drama. But before we do, would you please tell us briefly about your research into Attic women's fashion? And can you please tell us a little bit about the fabrics and garments in classical Athens before we move on to theatre?
Yeah, indeed. Okay, my research on the clothing and the fashion of Attic women, therefore I was studying a variety of sources like literature, iconography, archaeological fabrics, and also during my PhD I developed a new methodology based on 3D technologies to study the archaeological fabrics. So in general, why did I do that? Because normally when we think about the fashion and the fabrics and the costumes in ancient classical Greece and especially Attica, we think about the sculptures we see in the museums who are all white. We think about the designs we see, for example, on the vases in the museums. But these are somehow not the only sources, and somehow a little bit misleading, because the sculpture seems to us like an immaculate white, while on some of them still a couple of color restants were discovered by archaeologists. So that, in combination with ancient text and references to textiles and clothing, we have to conclude that the fashion in ancient Greece and Athens absolutely was not white. It was very colorful, with designs, with all kinds of techniques for decorations and so on. So that pushed me to go further and do also research on the theater costumes that we are going further to discuss today. And in all of this, we also should not think that everything was locally made in Athens, because classical Athens was not isolated society. They were traders, they were going to the east. So there was a lot of commerce also, and exchange for fabrics and influences from things that they saw over there. Because these were rare items, they were seen also as exquisite, exotic items. And of course, this leads to another thing, that is, in classical Athens, we should not forget that there were specific social codes who could wear which kind of colors, which kind of decorations, and so that's a very important thing when we have to go to the costume design for theater pieces.
Right. So thank you for that introduction on dress, daily dress. Let's then move on to the area of theatre. How would you first of all, how would you best describe the concept of costume design? What is costume design for you?
Now, for me, costume design is really part of making the theatrical magic happen. Costumes, for me, are the visual communicator in a theater piece. And the magic doesn't happen like this. It happens because there's an interaction between words, sound, acting, stage, and the costumes itself. So I think a central question that the costume designer must pose himself is, why are characters wearing what they wear? So for me, this answer to the question can be found by approaching costume design as a kind of applied art form. The costume is not an object that stands alone. It is an object that is part of a whole communication process. It will be used, it will be seen as part of an overall visual statement with the whole scenery that's around. So therefore, the costume designer must work simultaneously on different levels to create costumes for all the characters, that finally it will become one unified story that evoke emotions and responses in the audience. So I think we can dissociate different levels in this process. First of all, what is the venue? What is the theater? What is the stage where it will be happening? For example, is there a lot of light? If it's a somber lighting, what is all the elements of the, what we call in French, mise en scène, because that will influence also how we're going to design our costumes. Secondly, another thing that's important, the production company creating the work. So what are the expectations of the production company of the designer? What do they expect from the designer? What is the budget that they will give for the designs of the costumes? besides that, we have the storytelling mechanisms of the script. So how is the script built up? For example, does the actors have a lot of time to change? If they play different roles, if they play the same role but different parts at different moments. So these are all things that will influence how costumes will be made. And then, of course, what's very important is what is the context, the visual oral world of the story? In what period is it happening? What was the location? What were the social status of the actor, of the characters? So this is also something that the costume designer must know and must study to make correct theater costumes. So, and finally, something that's also very important is which actor is going to wear which costume. Because, of course, the physical features of an actor are going to determine also what we can do in the design. Not every bodily feature of an actor permits to design whatever would fit for somebody else. For example, somebody is very tall or somebody is very short. We have to adapt the costumes in function of that. So I think when the costumes go on the stage, they have to reveal all the needed information that the audience needs to make the correct interpretation or the meant interpretation by the director to the audience. But a costume on its own can't tell everything. So that's what I said a little bit before this. It is always, a costume will always be in dialogue with all the theatrical elements around the scenery. So I think each item of the costume, each item of the stage, each item of the lighting, it's all different artistic influences, artistic parts who at the end have to be one harmonized, how do you say, stage?
Entity.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary list for a designer to bear in mind as they begin work on the costumes. As a theatre director, I wouldn't even want to start listing the things one has to bear in mind, because I suppose that for a costume designer, it's a little bit like driving. It's all in the blood, you know, it all comes together and you don't actually think about it. It just has to happen. How do you begin your design work? Where do you begin? Where do you seek your inspiration when you say you're working on a classical piece? You choose the play that you want to discuss, and tell us a little bit about how you start.
Yeah, I think costume design always, for me, starts with reading the script and trying to feel the atmosphere of the play. Trying to comprehend each character, trying to comprehend the feelings of each character, because sometimes feelings of a character will not only be expressed by his acting and by his words, but also by the way he's dressed. It's a little bit like in our normal life. Sometimes if you are in a different mood, you will dress differently. So that's also very different for the characters in a theater production. So therefore, the script is the basis to start with, to try to understand these emotions. And then I think I can illustrate this a little bit by a character, Lysistrata, because it's a theater play from Aristophanes that's very well known by a lot of people, and there is a very good example in how a character can express a lot by the clothing and his own, and the meaning of the character itself, because as I said before, it's a non-verbal communication tool, and for example, Lysistrata was a very strong, is presented as a very strong woman. In her clothing, you can see that also, and in her acting, that I will describe later on more in detail, you can see that also. We'll go to the next slide now.
Ah, that's the illustration. Yes. Okay. Oh, that's it. Sorry, I've blown it up for myself. Yes. Can you? Yes. Can you describe a little bit what we're seeing here?
Yeah. So here I have put all elements that I use. For example, if I would go to resource myself for ancient Greek theater costumes. So we go like here on the left upper side, you see Lysistrata, the translated play by Jeffrey Henderson. So to get into the mood of that play, I started to read the script of Lysistrata. And then secondly, there is a scholar, Rosie Weil, she's a professor at Kent University, who did her PhD about costume in Greek tragedy. And it's an amazing source if you want to get to know more about the costumes and the fabrics and so on in ancient Greek theater. So secondly, I started to study and read in her book. And then, of course, going to the illustrations on vases and also in small statues and so on that we can find back in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, because it are miniatures from the mask that they used, characters that they used, and it reveals a lot about how the actors were presented on scene in the classical Greek theater.
If I may just interrupt here for a moment, just to add a little bit of useless wisdom. Studying Greek vases, observing Greek vases, we obviously see so many scenes from what we assume is Greek mythology, from what we assume are tales from Homer, which were part of the education culture of classical Greece. But in recent years, archaeologists and scholars have realized that actually the vases show us, and not just these Hellenic vases that we're having in front of us here, but even earlier vases from the late classical period show scenes from productions. And they tell us a great deal about Greek theater, but I think we'll come back to that probably later. That was just a little bit of an interruption.
No, you're absolutely right, Andrew. And the vases, for example, are also a very good inspiration source to see the decorations on the daily fabrics, because the scenes on vases that we have, like you say, are quite often from theater or from sceneries from inside the house. So for example, a lot of times women are depicted in weaving scenes or in other scenes from a household. So there we can see more about their clothing. While, for example, if we go to the National Archaeological Museum, we see a lot of sculptures that were placed on graves, where we can see also how women were dressed more when they go outside of the house. So we have to look into a lot of different sources, a lot of different images, and then of course the text to get a whole picture of everything.
Right. Okay. So let's sidestep a little bit for the moment. So we'll come back to specifics of costume later. But regarding ancient Attic drama, as far as we know, were the costumes made with the same techniques that they used in daily garments? Do we have any illustrations to give us any ideas? Do we have any evidence that can tell us whether the costumes were similarly made?
I think if we have sources, of course. We have, first of all, for textiles and garments in classical Athens, we have literature. And we have our archaeological textiles. There were some textile resins found in only graves in Attica. And we could analyze them with microscopic, with 3D microscopes to see which materials that were used, which colors that were dyeing colors that were used, and we see also a lot of references in literature. Like, for example, there was linen combined with wool, there was cotton, there was hemp. For red, they used often kermes or madder. For purple, murex. For brown, oak. For blue, pastel. For ochre, saffron. And it's very important to know these things, because in that time period, there were not, like nowadays, a wide variety of techniques and materials available. So we can't say that, okay, for the daily life they used only linen or wool, and then for the scenery, for theater costumes, they were only using cotton, for example, or hemp. No, because they didn't have that much, that great variety available. The same for the weaving techniques. There were different kind of weaving techniques, but the most common for weaving large fabrics that were necessary for the clothing was the vertical loom with loom weights. So we can imagine that the same techniques were used for daily life fabrics, and as for costume, as for theater costumes. But I think there are perhaps a couple of exceptions, like, for example, the murex that is here showed in the middle, purple murex. It's a very, very, very expensive dye, because it's made from the murex snail, and every murex snail only gives 2 or 3 drops that can be used for the dyeing. So for dyeing one whole fabric, or even enough threads to make a decoration and so on, you need thousands of snails. And so it's a very time-intensive labor. So somehow it was a very expensive dye. And
so is this the dye we call the imperial purple?
Exactly. Yeah. Later on, a couple of centuries later, it's called the imperial purple. Yeah. And therefore, there was a social code that only high society people were allowed to wear murex. But sources are referring that for theater costumes, they were able to make a kind of duplicate of this murex dye that was made from plants, so much less expensive. This was
so it intimated the high status of the character without actually being murex.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. But for the rest, I think more or less the same techniques were used. That's why for the classical period, it's very important to study what was used in daily life, because that somehow can be transferred to techniques for theater costumes.
So what we're looking at is actually an enormously colored world, a colorful world. Everything is painted in bright, lively, organic colors.
Yeah, all the techniques that they used were, okay, dyeing a complete fabric. Then for the most prestigious, they were using tapestry. They were also using embroideries.
And here we go.
The decorations that they used, the motifs that I'm showing you now, these are small motifs that quite often are found all over the fabric, like you can see on the vase drawings. And some of them are also still found on some corée that are in the museum, in the Acropolis Museum in Athens, that you see on the right side. These are typical motifs that were used all over the fabric. They could have been painted for more casual wear, or they could have been embroidered for more specific wear or elite wear. And then
Yes.
secondly, we see also organic patterns or geometric patterns who were not applied all over the fabric, but they were used for borders that were integrated in the fabric, or borders that were added, for example, on collars.
Mm-hmm.
So they were quite creative in finding all kinds of combinations from patterns, colors, and so on.
Yes, the beautiful matching of colors of the red and the blue on yes, it's difficult to imagine for us brought up on pure white classicism. It's quite a culture shock to suddenly realize that this was as colorful as India or North Africa.
Because, for example,
it's wonderful to think.
Yes, sorry. And for example, on the left picture, you can see that on her left shoulder, that part, that it was a fabric that was dyed completely. But the thing,
the undergarment, you mean the undergarment on the
exactly, yeah. But what was done in the beginning when they were finding the statues, quite often they thought it was dirt, so the statues were washed.
Yes, well, yes, we want our past to be pure, and assuming that white is the color of purity, so that was pure. But actually, it must have been staggeringly beautiful and very, very vivid. So, and what about the cut of the women's garments in Attica? Can you just tell me a little bit?
Okay.
Here we are, embroidery, decorations.
Okay. Yeah, we have some decorations also that are worth to show, because the decorations, like the buttons to close at the shoulder level, we had also the fabula to put the draping of a veil together, or scarf or so on. So these are also very important, because the materials that were used were also a marker of social status. So important, healthy people would wear them in gold, otherwise would wear them in bronze, you know.
Of course. Of course.
And then we have the main type of the female garments that had to be studied. So on the left side, it's the yellow one, yellow saffron one. It's the model of a peplos. It's just two vertical fabrics that are holded together on the shoulders with the typical buttons that I just showed here before. And they could have many kinds of decoration. They could be plain, they could be with decorations of here, like a kind of flower type. So, and then there was just a little belt in the middle, and it was just all falling down. And then we have a peplos, who are also two rectangle pieces, with one piece that is folded before and just kept together with this kind of fabula, for example. Yeah, and then we should not forget that most of the time when the women went out in classical Athens, they were veiled. They were wearing a veil. And this is something you can see on a lot of statues in the National Archaeological Museum from women women who were placed on graves in Kerameikos area.
Yes. So returning to theatre now, shifting from the streets of Athens, of classical Athens, and the households of classical Athens onto the stage. Tell us a little bit of why certain characters wear what they wear. You talked a little bit about status, but is it indeed like the phrase that clothes make the man? In other words, does the costume fully symbolize the character? And indeed, but if the character is also played by a man, or there are multiple characters, how does it work in ancient theatre for you?
Yeah, I would say indeed that clothes make the man and the woman, because, for example, the costume of Lysistrata, in the play itself, it embeds many meanings and references towards clothing and fabrics. And an essential example of the connotations of the costume, and through this characterization of Lysistrata, is her veil. And for example, I've chosen this element of her costume because it somehow unveils a lot about the character of Lysistrata. I will go to the next slide. You see here, it's a drawing about the part of Lysistrata that she's playing. Oh, I'm going too far. Now,
but just before you go on, but the veil performs a certain social function in the life and the street as well, doesn't it? The woman's veil. It's a very common thing, isn't it?
It's a very common thing, and it's also described that Lysistrata was apparently wearing saffron colored garments. And it's very important to notice that, because saffron was typically associated with women, and that's not something that is just from classical Athens, because that's something that dates already from the Bronze Age. For example, some women in Akrotiri, you see them wearing also saffron dyed clothing, and also collecting the saffron stems. So already for centuries before, it was associated with womanhood. And this is something we could also find back in the Brahran catalogs. The Brahran catalogs are found in the site of Artemis. And there are descriptions of women working in that site and clothed in saffron yellow garments. So it's something that for Lysistrata is very important, because it emphasizes her womanhood. While, for example, with the veil, at a sudden moment, she takes it off and puts it on the probulos, the man of the city, and with that act, somehow she feminizes the probulos, the man, you know, who knows everything about the city, and gives herself the right, more kind of the right to give her opinion about how the city should be ruled.
So in fact, a part of a woman's garment unmans the man, in a way, unmans him, and gives her, because she's rejected the veil, it gives her the right to speak for the city.
Exactly.
Extraordinary. Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if I would make a costume for Lysistrata, I think the veil is something that's an element of her garment that's really essential and can't left out.
Yes, one endlessly comes back to ritual in ancient Greek drama, and this is a social ritual which should be understood by everybody. But
Exactly.
For us Westerners, it has to be, so to say, unraveled, unmasked, unveiled.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit how craft and art influence a costume design? How you work at it?
Yeah, I can show you that with two examples. So the first one that I'm going to show you, where you see the beginning of, it is from a costume for Hecuba. And Hecuba is a part of the Delphic Maxims. It's a play directed by the Maria Callas Alumni Association together with Euphrosyne. And normally this was a play that was scheduled to go on stage last year, but due to the COVID, we couldn't go ahead with that, but we hope we can do that in the near future. The Delphic Maxim is composed of different monologues, and Hecuba is one of them. So first of all, I read, of course, the part of Hecuba, and then I looked into the actor who's going to play it, George Ilopios. And then I started to think, okay, how am I going to create the costume? So I thought, because Hecuba is a character, and also the part that George will play there. It's a character that's loaded with a lot of emotions, like pain, grief, worn out by the war and the killing. And then I thought about, okay, this is something that's perhaps best expressed by painting the colors, because I think some artists, like example for Rothko, if you see to his artwork, it gives you a lot of emotion. It expresses a lot of emotions. So through painting and colors, you can express, I think, a lot of emotions. That's what Hekeba was feeling. So I turned then to a young artist, and I explained all the feelings I wanted to be expressed. But there's, of course, other things that we had to take in consideration. Next to her feelings, it's her social status and the context where she's coming from. So Hekeba is coming from the East. She has a royal status. So for that, I wanted for sure that the main color from the fabric was a kind of purple. And then next to it, for the worn out, no, kind of purple. Additionally to that, the fabric needed to be giving a kind of luxurious aspect. So then I thought, okay, a fabric that expresses a luxurious aspect that can be seen, and so on, that people from nowadays also understand, is a kind of silk velvet that you can see on the left upper side. It's kind of white velvet. But as it needed to be worn out, I shaved off parts of it to have it a little bit destroyed. And then once that fabric was ready, then the artist started to use different kinds of colors, like purple, but also red, to emphasize the blood that was spilled in that war, to emphasize the killings that were happening where she was suffering from. And then you see here that she used all kinds of painting techniques, all kinds of different colors to obtain finally the fabric that you can see on the right side. So, and then to go more to the original context, I think the dress needed some additional decorations. So I asked an artist who's making accessories for haute couture dresses if she could make me a kind of band that we designed together with a color like a kind of old gold and spirals in, because spirals was a kind of motif that was used also for decorations on ancient fabric. But I didn't want to use exactly the same techniques as I explained before for the decorations. So that's why I asked her to make a band like you can see here on the pictures. So, and then I go back to a little bit the structure of the part. Because it's the Delphic Maxims, it's a follow-up of different monologues. The costumes need to be very easy to put on and off. So for that reason, I decided to just stuck to the traditional cut of the garments, like I explained before, just 2 rectangles and the sleeves put together like a chiton, but then just sewn together in this case because we have already the decorations of the bands. And then another example is from the play of the birds, and this costume is made for the main character of the chorus. And what I did here is, because it's kind of dark emotions in that play, and the stage was also not very bright, and so a dark atmosphere, I decided to use the color black. But for this design, it's a completely different approach, because I try to express the things of the play, not through the painting and the colors, but to the structure of the dress. So it's quite different. So what you can see is her right shoulder. has the right part of the dress has a kind of sleeve. So if you put your arm up with that sleeve, the fabric goes all open, and it is almost like a wing of a bird.
Oh.
So that's the one part of the duality of the play. It's the bird part. And then the other part of the dress, the diagonal cut, I left open, because that part I left open for the human part. So we get in the dress the duality of the play of the human part and the bird part.
I understand. The quality of the dress actually makes me think of haute couture. Is there a link between the making of this dress and haute couture?
Absolutely, absolutely. I chose for the fabric of the dress a 100% silk jersey, because silk jersey enabled the fluidity of, for example, birds who are flying in the sky. And next to it, I asked also a friend of mine. She's a haute couture dressmaker in Paris, and she is really specialized in making drapes. And she made the dress for us. So and additionally what I also did is the brooch that you can see made of bird feathers is also made by an artisan in Paris, and I wanted to add feathers on the human part of the dress to emphasize the messenger part in the play of the bird. And why do I use all those craftspeople and like haute couture people? Because it's part of my philosophy also in my when I make designs for fashion, that I think it's very important to keep these people and this knowledge alive.
Nathalie, we're going to be running out of time very soon. The first part of our encounter today, but there is one more question I'd like to ask briefly. As we've discussed this transition between the ancient and the modern and modern interpretation, of course, we both agree that theatre is not a museum. We're not there simply to recreate clothes of the past or artifacts of the past and present them to a contemporary audience. After all, theatre is always an encounter with the present, even if seen through the eyes of the past. It can be reassuring, it can be entertaining, but it can also be revelatory and extremely disturbing and provoking. Do you consider these elements when designing costumes for modern interpretation of a classical play?
Yeah, I agree with that. Modern interpretations doesn't mean that we have just to copy the old costumes, but I think it's implying historical elements to create modern designs with correct character connotations. So I think costumes are created for an audience in a specific cultural context. So this context has its own codes and abilities to decode the messages from the theater costumes. So I think the designer should take this into account when creating the costumes. For example, in liberated cultures, transparency will be tolerated, while in other stricter or religious cultures, this will be seen as an offense towards the public. So I think in a way, contemporary costumes are designed within the context of two cultures. On one hand, the source culture of the play, and on the other hand, the contemporary culture of the public. So I think it's the dynamics between these two cultures that lead to appropriate theater costumes.
And do you think there is also a third way, which is the metaphor, the world of the play itself, which comes out of those two, perhaps, or is somehow driven towards by the meeting of those two, by the meeting of the old and the contemporary, and then we find a world which is right for the play itself?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's where it's all about. That we find the You have the two worlds, and then the third world is a result from the dynamics in between the two of them. Yeah.
We're going to come to the end of the first part of our meeting. If there is time, we will also discuss one more topic afterwards, but we'll see. So,
Okay.
ladies and gentlemen, visitors, audience, friends, everybody who's here, and I see there are at least 30 of you, I will now ask you to log off, to leave the meeting, and in the meantime, for 10 minutes exactly, and email any questions that you'd like to ask Nathalie. Make yourselves a cup of tea, a quick cup of coffee, or pour yourselves a drink, and please click on the second link provided in the email that was sent to you so we can rejoin the conversation in 10 minutes time. We will also log off and hope to see you back here in 10 minutes. Okay. Come back to our meeting with Nathalie Bries, our costume designer and fashion designer and researcher, in this first of our Circle of Art encounters. Nathalie, we have a few questions from you that have been emailed by friends. And I have another question for you as well. And maybe I will ask my question first, because it's not only is it my privilege, but also perhaps it will help the others and it will guide us towards answering some of the questions. I wanted to ask about certain specific features in costumes of ancient Greek theatre that are not typical of daily life and perhaps present something of a hybrid that we're not really used to in contemporary theatre, but which help us and should help us in defining characters. You've got an illustration.
Okay, you all see the slides? Technically, I don't know if it works or not. You can see. Okay, perfect. Okay, one thing that was typical for ancient Greek theater is that all the parts were played by men. Even men with masks, with a beard and so on, all the plays were played by men. So how did they manage them? Because sometimes the same actor was playing a female part and a male part. So they had found a solution, and we can see it on statues, we can see it on drawings on vases, but we also have a lot of references towards it in ancient literature, in text, ancient Greek text. So, and that costume piece is called a sommasion. So what is it? It is a piece that is made apparently of, most of them, of fine wool. And it's an upper part and a lower part. And it's very tight to the body. And what put they in? They put in fillings, paddings for breasts, for the woman part. Often also an exaggerated belly, and additionally, they also have a phallus. So you have the association of a female representation and a man representation that goes together in one for one actor. So what they do is this kind of under clothing, they keep it the whole play, and the only thing that they change is the clothes they wear above, according to if they played the female part or the male part. Also, most of the time the mask is changed at the same moment that the garment is changed, for example, from a man to a woman, because through the mask they also try to express a lot of the character, not only if it's a man or a woman, but they try to express the emotions and also the social status. For example, the masks incorporate also often the kind of jewelry. So for an elite woman, it will be very expressive. For a modest woman, it will be almost nothing. So that's something That's very important in ancient Greek theater. Also, the combination of female and women in one costume.
Right, fantastic. Now, let me go to the questions. Some of them refer to fashion, some of them refer to contemporaneity, and some of them indeed refer to multiple characterizations. So let me start. We have a question from, a dear friend, Adam Goodwin. He says to Nathalie, given the modern research you have outlined to us this evening on color and fabric in ancient Greece, if they were to remake a movie like Ridley Scott's Gladiator, would the costumes be very different to what they used in the year 2000 when they made the film? And are modern audiences educated enough to accept something other than a white flowing ancient Greece? Thank you for an enlightening presentation.
I would say yes, the costumes, if I would make a remake of it, I would make the costumes much more colorful, even if the audience perhaps is not expecting it. So it can be a revealing remake for the audience. And somehow also it's the last decade. If you go to the Acropolis Museum now, they made small copies of some of the choré and they painted them with colors on. They published it in books and so on. So I think there is much more available now about the colorness about the bright colors that were used in ancient Greece for clothing than it was 20 years ago. So yeah, I would remake it with more colors.
Indeed, yes, and presenting a different culture, because we have a different view of the culture and present a new one. That's wonderful. And
like you mentioned before, Andrew, we should not forget it's a society that was in contact with the East also, and the East had a lot of colorful fabrics, garments, and so on. So there was certainly an influence from the East that was seen in the garments and use of colors.
It'd be wonderful to do that. There is a question from Gabriel Moletta, who is one of the of our teachers on the annual Kalamata Drama International Summer School. And Gabriel says, thank you. Lots of lovely, rich information and investigation into costume for classical theatre. My question, Nathalie, often in the context of working on a Greek play, and particularly since COVID, I have a small cast who play chorus and the main characters. There must be lots of wonderful choices one can make to enable the characters to be clear to the audience when they step from a chorus member to, say, playing Electra or Orestes. If one particular choice comes to mind that you have used through a simple element in costume, I'd love to hear about it. Thank you.
Now, I think if you have one person playing several characters, it's a little bit what I just explained. I would make a contemporary version of a summation. And then you can add, like I explained with Hecuba, like George is going to change, also going from one character to another, even perhaps changing on stage. You can make a kind of contemporary summation. You add the female or male parts, yes or no, that's up to the director of the play. But if you have a kind of underwear that the actor is playing, you can easily change and put an easily cut garment that you can change in seconds of time. And of course, decoration pieces. Decoration pieces can also make a huge difference or a big difference in characterization.
Yes, you're right. A single element can create a complete change.
Or a mouth.
Yeah, and I love the idea of characters transforming in view of the audience. For me, that's part of the theatre magic. It's sort of something inexplicable happens in front of the audience. I think that's beautiful. Another question from another dear friend, Louise Burns. Hello, question for Nathalie. You have opened my eyes to this colourful world of ancient Greece. In your encounters with theatre, is there a particular production that stands out as revelatory or simply exciting in how it captured this color?
I I think for me, the ancient production of Lysistrata is a very important play where color is having a very important role with you know with the saffron yellow clothing of Lysistrata. For me, it's very specific for that time period.
And culture, I suppose.
Yeah.
Particular culture that actually is, but we do need to adjust. We need to adjust our mindset about what the culture looked like, not necessarily what it did for us, what it left us, or what its heritage is, but what its legacy is, but what it looked like and how it functioned within a completely different system of rituals, daily rituals based on color and fabric as well. I have a question from Theano Soldato. Hello, I have a question. When we are dealing with a play that is not traditional, apart from the atmosphere and the character, is there any other source to get you inspired, or is it based only on your imagination? I mean, of course, you can get inspiration from everything, but is there anything else you particularly look for when working? So you had text and you had sources.
Music, sound. If you want to get sometimes in a specific atmosphere, try to listen to the contemporary, to the music of that period.
That is true, because if you're doing an American play, a 1940s or 1950s Arthur Miller, you'd try to enter that world through its culture. And if the culture is represented, whether it's painting or whether it's music or whether it's photograph at the time, everything.
Exactly. It can be if it's from a time period that classical Greece is very limited in sources, but if it's from a time period that is the 20s or the 30s or the 40s, there are many sources. There are photographs, like you said, Andrew. There are some movies, going to museums, for example, where they exhibit historical clothing from that period. There are amazing sources if you go more to contemporary periods, of course. Yeah.
Yes, I think research is vital. I mean, you need to feed yourself on research and then see what happens, how your inspiration and imagination and talent can produce something that is specific to the play, which is what you've been talking about throughout this evening.
Yeah, I think somehow with all the sources that are available for a certain time period, by connecting yourself to all those different sources, you create yourself a kind of bubble where you arrive in, with all stimuli coming to your mind and forming an idea, an atmosphere about that period.
Yeah. If anybody else wants to send a question to George, please feel free to do so. And we still have time. I'm going to ask Nathalie a question as well in a moment. I've just had a message. What else, Nathalie, would influences your costume design? Those individuals?
I would say, of course, like I said before, the actor who's playing the part, it's very important. The physics of the actor, because if you create a costume, the actor itself has to feel good in it. He has to, if it's for a character where he has to move a lot and so on, then you can't use rigid fabrics. You can't use cuts for a garment that movement is difficult and so on. So an actor has to become almost one with his costume so that the costume doesn't limit him in his acting. So I think if you then go in your creativity, you can go far in your creativity until where the actor is going to be disturbed by your costume. There it has to stop. I think the actor is very important to in the creation process. And then, of course, also every play has its budget. So you have to try to be as creative as you can with a certain kind of budget. And it doesn't mean if you have a small budget that you can't do many things. Sometimes a limited budget gets that little extra creativity out of you.
That is true. That is true, because it's an extra pressure, and pressure very often creates wonderful results, artistic results, and very practical results as well. After all, theatre is practical, has to be practical as well as inspirational. I want to add something that I really wanted to ask you very, very much. On a personal level, as a creative artist, what are the links for you between the creation of contemporary fashion and designing costumes for classical plays? What world do you enter?
Yeah, no, I think there are a lot of somehow similarities the way you approach to design something. If you start designing clothing, for example, you design for a certain public or for a certain person. So you have to know also the codes of that public. You have to know what the culture is of that of the public where you design for. You have to understand in which context it will be worn. So it's all you ask almost similar questions like the questions you ask if you create a costume for a character in a certain time period, a certain place. The same type of questions you ask when you go into designing.
So in haute couture, you ask the same questions?
Yeah, more or less, yeah. Because, for example, if a person decides to wear something, the clothes you wear will tell a lot about your mood sometimes, about your social status. With the clothes that you put on every day, you communicate something. Exactly like an actor on stage, through his costumes, he communicates about the social status, about the mood, about the period where he lives in, the region where he comes from, and it's a little bit the same for clothing.
That is very true. That's it. I think we have come to the end of a very rich conversation, of a very rich introduction by you, rather than conversation introduction. My contribution is minimal, but thank you so much for sharing your experience with us and your work, and thank you for still finding the time for us while you're there in Dubai planning next year. Nathalie, thank you very, very much. And I also want to thank Sophia for controlling us from the gastronomic paradise of Modena in Italy. And thank you, George, for making this possible, and for being the most efficient and polite contact platform with the whole world on the behalf of Kalamata Drama. Thank you, friends, for joining us. And I hope we shall have the pleasure of your company on Monday, the 28th of June, for our encounter with Paweł Dobrzycki, world-famous stage designer and artist who will be traveling from Poland to be with us in Kalamata to talk about his work. Nathalie, George, Sophia, and everybody, friends, thank you very, very much for helping us initiate our Circle of Art, and good night to you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.